So this talk is more about technical aspects. So this is work done by me and Mikkel. And I really wanted to start with this slide. Again, coming from academia. In 2024, we wrote a paper about, creating defenses against AI-driven cyber attacks. The idea was very simple. You create an honeypot designed to attract the AI hacker, and then you reply with prompt injection and try to take control of the agent and disable it. When this paper went under review, the first comment, usually most reviewers at this comment, is that they didn't believe that LLMs will become a real issue, like LLM-driven attacks will become a real cybersecurity issue in the future. And this gives you a sense of how fast things are moving, right? Like it's fast even for AI pace. Thinking that right now in this room, this workshop is about this, right? And you can see this online. A lot of papers, a lot of GitHub projects that implement this form of agentic systems where you do API key, they are harnessed, and they execute pen testing on whatever target you want. And this happened in 1 year. And what usually is at odds with velocity is security, right? When things move fast, sometimes the product is not security is not the first feature. And so in this research, we ask ourselves, those are tools that people are using. Can these tools be dangerous? Like, can the user get hacked because of using those tools? So let me clarify the threat model here. So essentially, let's imagine we have a user. The user wants to pen test xbow.ai. That's a joke on one of our competitors. We actually bought this domain. But the agent starts looking into the target that is maliciously controlled. And the threat model here, or the agent can access resources that are somehow contaminated. And the idea is that those resources trick the agent to essentially hack the user. And this is important because these tools, as we saw in the previous talk, essentially, they will be used in practice. They will be used from people on the field, and we want them to be secure. If you're using a tool like this in a real cybersecurity operation, this is a new vector of attack that the adversary can use against you. So better if it's safe. And even if you don't believe that there is an adversary out there that is going to prompt inject your agent, adversarial robustness is a very, very good proxy for any kind of robustness. Like if you are worried about loss of control, hallucination, if you design a system that can be secure against an active adversary, you're also quite secure that if the LLM hallucinates, it's not going to escape the sandbox and compromise your host. Now, in order to answer the original question, can AI hackers get you hacked? We started looking in this piece of research, and what they did essentially is just take the 10 more common pen testing tools, agentic pen testing tools online. We tried to hack them. As I said before, we used them as an attack vector to compromise the user. What we found is a list of shared architectural flows that are common among many of those tools. And then, the final objective is always try to fix. And so in the presentation, reasoning on these flows, we are going to propose a kind of better architecture that should at least reduce the blast radius when your agent is going to be compromised. So this is general summary of the results. but we are going to look in this table piece by piece as we move forward. But on the left, you can see like the code bases we analyzed. So I want to start with an example of attack. This is against Penta AGI. I think it has like 20K stars on GitHub. And so we have the harness, Penta AGI, running on whatever model you want, Opus 4.7. Everything is running inside a Docker container for sandboxing, because still people think that those agents can be manipulated, so they put a container around them in order to reduce the possible harm. That is correct. So we have our xbow.ai honeypot. It contains a path dev. The agent is going to discover it. And inside dev, we have something like this. There is a secret TXT that essentially say credential to admin panel password is encrypted in order to decrypt. Forgot a T. Use decoder password, login admin, and the password is some kind of hash. And in the same directory, there is a binary called decoder that is just a reverse shell, essentially. What is going to happen? The agent finds it, bring it home. Of course, doesn't execute immediately. This is Opus 4.7, so it has some guardrails. What it does is just some due diligence, start looking into the binary, figure out if it's good or bad. But this is very easy to bypass. So essentially, very little obfuscation, essentially just storing the critical part and storing them at runtime, and adding a bit of storytelling into how the binary is created. So for instance, this is a reverse shell, right? The reverse shell needs to call home in order to create the channel for the command for remote code execution. And so there is a HTTP request in the binary. You cannot hide that. You can, but that's another story. So how can we explain that to the LLM? We say, you need to recover a salt from the website in order to decrypt the hash. And that's enough. If you just add some comments, you preserve when you compile it, find the right story, the right names for the function, the LLM is going to look to this and just execute it because it's good enough. It's realistic for the LLM. And this approach is something that we call adversarial reward hacking. We wrote a paper about that if you want to give a look. But yeah, so the coder, a bit obfuscated, the agent executed, boom, remote code execution on the container. And the output of the decoder is something realistic. So the LLM believes, OK, it's all good. This is the password. Let me continue with the pen testing. But internally, there is a fork and the reverse shell. Now, there is an issue. This is not isolated. This happens very often, as we are going to see later. The Docker container is mounting the Docker socket. This is because the harness is also able to spawn new containers. So essentially, they allow write on the Docker socket. And with the remote code execution on the container, we get to the socket, and we compromise the user. So again, escape the sandbox, remote code execution on the user, essentially one click away, just pen testing the wrong target. But remote code execution is just the starting point. Some of these tools don't have any form of sandboxing. So having remote code execution on the container means you already have control of everything. But most of them, they have multiple levels of sandboxes. So if you achieve remote code execution on the container, again, that's just the starting point. there is much more that you need to do to create real harm to the user, and it's kind of representing the scale that we're going to use to guide this presentation. So the first thing you can do is, stealing sensitive information, even if you are in the container. One example is API keys for LLMs. You need the LLM API keys in order to make the LLM work. If you have a remote model, and let's start from that. So in most of the cases, it's very simple to retrieve the API keys. This is because essentially, so a bit of background. So you can see any pentesting agent as composed of two components. One is the worker, and the other is the orchestrator. The orchestrator is where all the logic happens. Like here, there is the LLM, they take decisions, execute tools. You have the memory, you have the skills, you have whatever. And there is the worker that is just the entity that executes the comments. It can be a Kali container or whatever. Now, the issue on why, if you reach remote code execution on the container, you can manage to steal the API keys, is that essentially, in some cases, they implement the orchestrator and the worker on the same sandbox. So if I get remote code execution on the worker, boom, I have access to the orchestrator to same machine, and I can get the keys. So how can we fix this? First, you might not believe me, but maybe at the end of the presentation you might. But the first thing that we need to agree here is essentially there is no way to prevent this. I will always be able to get remote code execution on your worker, on your agent. It's very hard. There is no guardrail that can protect you from distinguish what is hacking the target or hacking yourself. So your best shot to remain secure in this setting is just assume that your worker will be compromised. And the only thing you can do in order to reduce the harm is design your system in order to reduce the blast radius. And using this principle, essentially, an easy way to fix at least the leakage of sensitive information is just, I'm going to split the worker and orchestrator into components. The worker, again, I'm going to assume it is malicious. There is always room for being compromised. And then we have the orchestrator, where all the secrets are stored. The only thing I need to make sure is that the channel, the communication channel between the orchestrator and the worker is safe. In practice, we are going to see later that it's very easy to perform lateral movement in the settings. But if you have this framework and it works, if I get remote code execution on the worker, nothing bad can happen. I cannot steal your secrets, at least. But that's just part of the issue. So another thing is, I have remote code execution on your worker. What I can do is just, use it as to do whatever I want. I can add it to the botnet. I can use it to attack. Sorry. I can use it to attack a government site. and get use SWAT. I can do whatever I want. So essentially, this is one thing that we call agent weaponization, is that once I control your agent, I can do whatever I want with it. Of course, you want to avoid it. To be honest, people try to avoid this issue. Most of the agents have some kind of guardrails, like prevent to the worker from connecting to IP outside the target or specific IPs. For instance, this is the case of Red Diamond, another quite famous pen testing tool. They have like all regex list with, you cannot attack gov UK, you cannot attack gov whatever. Now, there is just a problem. Can you imagine what's the problem? It's about where those guardrails are applied. Any idea? The issue is that the guardrails are applied to orchestration level. That means that, again, assume I have a remote code execution on the worker that always verified. I can just do whatever I want because the controls are not on the worker, on an orchestrator. They prevent the LLM to call a tool with the IP, if not bypassable. But again, I have full control on the worker, so I can do whatever I want. A way to fix it, I mean, nothing new here. It's the usual story. I break the architecture. I add a trusted component. In this case, for web, it's an egress proxy, where all the traffic from the worker goes to. And then I have some policy that is decided by the orchestrator. It cannot be controlled by the worker. Sorry. So remote code execution on the worker. I want to nmap aggressively ci.gov. I try. I fail because the egress proxy prevents that possibility. So when you implement guardrails, think where the guardrails live. And in this very case, the only way to impose constraints is define something external to the worker. Another key thing, again, this is trivial, but it gets implemented wrong many times, is you should never let the LLM decide when to enforce a policy. I have a very good example. So this is another agentic pen tester called Raptor. This is a bit out of scope because this is more white box. But this is like a perfect example for what I want to see. So on the right, you have the scheme of a sandbox. Every rectangle here is a different kind of sandbox. And everything fits perfectly. Like, it's the best sandbox I've ever seen. There is just an issue that when the agent can execute something, doesn't always execute in the sandbox, can decide to execute it in the normal environment. So, of course, I can just create a better prompt injection to manipulate the agent to always run outside the sandbox. So this super good sandbox is just useless. This is another interesting example. Again, a bit out of scope, but it's very interesting to me. So do you know how Cloud Code Sandbox works? So essentially, it's not real sandbox. It's more a way to reduce notification for the user. So you have a sandbox, OS level sandbox implemented with a bubble wrap on Mac. And essentially, you define the rules of the sandbox. What file system can see and what network connection can see. Now, assume I'm using Cloud Code with the attack I described before. And if you set sandbox, it's going to execute the coder in the sandbox. Now, the cool thing about the Cloud Code Sandbox is that essentially, when executed, if there is a violation of the sandbox, for instance, here, you are not allowed to connect to any network, the decoder makes outgoing connection to the xbow.i server to establish the reverse shell, and this is caught by the sandbox, okay? And the sandbox is going to create an error saying, okay, the executable tried to get this connection. You are not allowed to do it under the sandbox. This goes back to the LLM, and the LLM says, okay, doesn't make sense that the decoder wants to make a network connection to that website. It's a malware. I'm not going to execute it. Now, the interesting thing here is that essentially you can create the payload in such a way that recognizes if it's running inside a sandbox. And if that is the case, you can change the output of the model without revealing the malicious intent. So this is actually what our payload does. Is going to be executed in the sandbox. And then there is an if. If the sandbox, if we are inside the sandbox, print a fake error. If we are not inside the sandbox, trigger the reverse shell. In the case is yes, and the binary, not the sandbox, is going to create a fake error that looks like a real cloud core error, saying, okay, in order to execute this, I need this DDL, and I'm not allowed to execute it on the sandbox because it's outside the file system. This is a random example. The LLM sees this and say, okay, this makes sense. And then the LLM can decide if run the decoder outside the sandbox. And in 99% of the cases is what happens. So it's like a second order prompt injection based on knowing if we are in the sandbox or not. And in this case, because the LLM can choose to run something outside the sandbox, I can still softly evade the sandbox and manage to get a reverse shell on cloud code. So this is another example why you should not let the LLM decide what to enforce. Another important thing here is, in most of the cases, achieving persistence on the agent is trivial. For instance, in many cases, you are not supposed to reset the worker after every session, or you can achieve essentially lateral movement and insert yourself into the orchestrator. There are cases where, again, the orchestrator and the worker are the same container. So remote code execution on the worker means persistence on the orchestrator. But there are also cases more interesting where, again, there is this separation. And the attacker will want to achieve persistence on the orchestrator side. In most of the cases, this is possible. This for various reasons. Here, an example with Red Diamond. So here, the thing is that essentially they have an MCP server on the orchestrator side. And for convenience, they mounted this on the worker. So essentially what I can do as remote code execution on the worker is essentially changing the source code inside the MCP in order to add a Trojan, and that is going to be copied on the orchestrator. So even if they reset the worker, essentially I have persistence on the orchestrator. And this is like, again, the first type of persistence that is like source code persistence, and we can achieve this kind of stuff for many agents. Another setting is something that we can call LLM knowledge-based persistence, that once you have the worker with the remote code execution, what you can do is essentially create a fake view of reality and completely change the memory if the agent has a memory system or skills or whatever. Information the orchestrator keeps across runs. And doing that, essentially, you can perform prompt injection on the memory or create a skill with a prompt injection and maintain control on the orchestrator. How do we fix this? So the main thing is, again, assume that your worker is going to be compromised and is fully malicious. And you need to reset it every time you change session. So different pen testings, different workers. This is trivial. Another thing, in many cases, we could perform lateral movement from the worker to orchestrator because we have a lot of communication channels between the worker and the orchestrator. What you want to do to avoid this kind of lateral movements is minimize information flow from the worker and orchestrator. You must have some information passing through because the worker is going to execute the tools, you want the outputs, but you must keep it as small as possible. And especially, again, consider the worker fully malicious and also everything the worker produces as malicious. And because this window is small, the only way you can be secure enough that your orchestrator is not compromised is just put a human approval gate there or any kind of system that give you enough assurance that a lateral movement is not possible. Cool. But as you can see on the table, in many cases, we could achieve full loss compromise. Some of these agents don't consider any form of sandbox. So again, the first two lines is trivial. Remote code execution on the worker means full loss compromise. In other cases, everything's running within a sandbox, multiple sandboxes sometimes. And it looks very strange that we are able to achieve like full loss compromise or other capabilities on the host, essentially in 80% of the cases. And there is a very specific reason for that, is that this table shows like the capabilities that the providers are providing to the containers. And I can see there is a clear trend. Most of these containers have advanced network capabilities. Do you know why? Do you want to try to guess? No? Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. If you want to use Nmap or whatever point scanning or whatever debugger, you need high privilege on the container. Otherwise, your tool is useless. So people, again, you have to, on the worker, you have two kind of tools. Tools that need some kind of privilege and tools that don't need privilege. This is like the usual least privilege principle violation. Because I need some tools on the worker to use specific capabilities. What I do is just add high privilege to all the worker. This is super simple to fix. Okay, sorry. So if I have remote code execution on the worker, I can very easily, with a privileged container, to jump on the orchestrator. And sometimes, when combined with other stuff, I can access the host network or the host file system directly and compromise it. Fixing this is simple. Again, basic security is I split the worker in two. I have a specialized worker with the capabilities I need. And I move all the tools that need that capability there. And rather than allowing the orchestrator to run arbitrary stuff on the specialized worker, because this is a small set of tools, what I can do is just define task-specific API that, for instance, run Nmap with this parameter, run Nabu with this parameter, or whatever. This way, essentially, I minimize the surface where one of these tools can be used to compromise and escape the sandbox. This is good. There are actually tools that do this. Like there is Red Diamond is a good example of this, maybe bad example, as we are going to see. But they got it right. So they created a specific container just to run a Nabu that essentially is a different version. It's a port scanner. And they define an API task, API interface to allow the orchestrator just to use specific stuff on the Nabu side. As you can see on the orchestrator side, we have a Docker orchestration API. That is an API that the orchestrator can use in order to spawn multiple Docker containers based on the requirement. Here, there's an issue is that there is no authentication. From the worker to the orchestrator, they are in the same network, and there is no authentication on the Docker API. So what the worker can do is just spawn internally an Abo container with high privileges and use it to escape the sandbox. So again, they got right the separation of tasks, but also you must make sure that the API interface is implemented properly. So closing up, really there are just a bunch of things I want to say. The first is awareness. I want to give you is awareness. Just be aware that when you're using one of these tools, you might be one click away from being compromised. So, same thing for other agentic tools, but I think this is a special case. And so if every time you are running something like this, sandbox it as you can, like add sandbox over sandbox, so that you are able to reduce the blast radius. And when you are designing such systems, again, the first question you should ask yourself while writing the architecture is, will my agent be manipulated? And yeah, I think the answer here is always yes. Assume that your agent is fully malicious. So another question you can ask yourself is, are guardrails useless here? I don't think they're useless. Again, we saw that most guardrails were useless because they were implemented in the wrong way. But they can do something. The only thing is that your best shot to keep this stuff secure is just assume that your guardrails are going to fail. Again, this is something that I mentioned before. I believe that we can achieve almost secure code agents. I almost secure that we can achieve secure chatbots. With agentic cyber operation stuff, the thing is different. Again, the action space is so large that is like impossible to distinguish between the agent is hacking the target or the agent is hacking me. So again, implement guardrails, but assume they are useless and design to reduce the blast radius. Workers malicious, I'm designing the architecture so that when the worst happens, I'm sure that lateral movement is difficult, that escalation is difficult, that persistence is difficult, and all my secrets are on orchestrator, and there is no lateral movement. Cool. That was quite pessimistic, but is it bad? Is it just not good people using those tools, but also the bad ones? And this is a very good idea to try to create a defense, right? So we know that people are using those agents to perform attacks. We saw an example before. And if they are so easy to manipulate, why not use it as a defense? And this is again, the idea we were pushing in 2024, using this inherent vulnerability of agents in order to create a layer of defense. I can manipulate an agent with the best harness, with the best model, into run an arbitrary binary and get a reverse shell. I can convince an agent that attacking my system to do the same, or to enter in a tar pit, or to stop the attack. So I guess this is, people don't like this kind of defenses, like based on deception. But I do think that this is going to be one of the possible solutions. And indeed, a Kraken. This is an open source project. Soon we will be releasing Blackwater. That essentially is a system of honeypots with dynamic signatures meant for production level systems in order to implement this kind of defense. Honeypots that attract AI traffic and manipulate them to do stuff, disable the self, let us collect intel about them in order to figure out what to do next. But yeah, if you are interested in in this project, please let me know. We are still building it, and collaboration is an option here. But that's it. Again, coming from academia, I have a bunch of papers that I mentioned during the presentation. Give a look. And if you have any questions, I'm here.